Northern Wisconsin's cutover region carries a story etched into the land itself, a story of ambition, hardship, abandonment, and renewal. By the time the Great Depression arrived in the 1930s, the region had already endured its first great upheaval. Logging had stripped the forest bare, leaving behind stumps, thin soils, and a fragile hope that farming might somehow take root. Settlers in Bayfield, Washburn, Forest, and Price counties tried to coax crops from the rocky remnants of forests, but when the national economy collapsed, so did their dream. By 1932 and 1933, property tax delinquency in the cutover soared to an astonishing 40.5%. Foreclosures swept across the countryside. In Washburn County, the village of Shell Lake lost more than 10% of its population. Forest County, overwhelmed by poverty, became the first in the nation to receive aid from the U.S. Resettlement Administration. Across rural Wisconsin, farmers faced debts they could not pay, crops they could not sell, and land they could no longer hold. Local governments, deprived of tax revenue, struggled to keep schools open and roads maintained. Businesses closed, banks failed. The cutover dream of turning logged land into prosperous farms had come to an end. Yet, even as families left their farms behind, the land itself began a quiet recovery. The state and federal governments stepped in, purchasing abandoned homesteads and guiding reforestation efforts. The Wisconsin Land Economic Inventory, known as the Bordner Survey, mapped soil quality and helped determine which lands could be saved and which should return to forest. County forests, state parks, and national wilderness areas took shape, including what would become the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. What had once been a checkerboard of failed farms slowly transformed into a landscape of conservation and renewal. The land was reclaiming its story. By the mid-20th century, a new pattern of life emerged across northern Wisconsin. Lakeshores, once remote and overlooked, became magnets for fishing, cabins, and summer recreation. Between 1937 and 1999, housing in the region increased by more than 350%, much of it clustered around lakes. The interior lands reforested, while the edges flourished with tourism. The cutover region was no longer a place of agricultural struggle. It was becoming a landscape of retreat, recreation, and seasonal life. The transformation was underway, not just in the land, but in the communities themselves. For the towns scattered across the cutover, the shift was profound. The Depression years had emptied schools, shuttered stores, and scattered families. Churches and civic groups became lifelines, holding communities together when economic structures failed. But as forests returned, so did a new sense of purpose. Public lands brought jobs in conservation and timber. Tourism offered seasonal income. Heritage, schools, veterans memorials, church picnics, and community gatherings became the glue that preserved identity through decades of change. Ogema, like many northern Wisconsin towns, gradually reshaped its identity as the farming era faded. No longer defined by agricultural hardship, communities became rooted in history, recreation, and a deep connection to the forests, rivers, and lakes that surrounded them. From the abandoned farms of the 1930s to the reforestation of the 1940s through the 1960s, and later the rise of seasonal tourism in the 1970s through the 1990s, towns in the region adapted again and again. Each generation built upon the last, turning adversity into heritage. By the late 20th century, the cutover region had become something entirely new. Cabins dotted the lakeshores, trails wound through young forests. Visitors arrived to fish, hunt, hike, and reconnect with nature. Communities embraced tourism, but also worked to preserve their stories through museums, local history groups, school reunions, and veterans memorials. The hardship of the Depression era were not forgotten. Instead, they became part of the region's identity, a reminder of resilience, endurance, and the power of reinvention. Ogema and its neighboring towns found strength not in what had been lost, but in what could be remembered and rebuilt. The land had healed, the communities had adapted, and a new chapter had begun. The Great Depression marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. Northern Wisconsin's cutover lands, once symbols of failed ambition, became landscapes of renewal. Forests returned, lakes thrived, communities rediscovered their purpose. Today, the region stands as a testament to resilience, where hardship gave way to heritage, and where memory still roots itself in the land. This is the legacy of the cutover, a story of loss, recovery, and the enduring strength of the people who call northern Wisconsin home.